Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the Prison Math podcast. I'm joined today by Dr. Rosemary Ricciardelli of Memorial University. Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you today?
Pretty good. So to start things off, why don't you give us a bit of an introduction into some things you do, some of the things you research.
Sure. So I'm a professor at Memorial. I'm also affiliated with the Canadian Institute for Public Safety Research and Treatment, CIPSRT. And I basically do research that's tied to correctional spaces. So I've done work with people who have been incarcerated. I've done work with people actively in different stages of sentencing in the community. I have done research with public safety personnel, including correctional officers, parole officers, and correctional workers more generally. And that's sort of where my research interests kind of fall, like in the relevancy.
Yeah, I noticed. I was looking through some of your papers, and I saw that you had focused both on people who are incarcerated and as well, people working within the penitentiary system. One of the papers I noticed you looked at specifically the impact of COVID-19 on prisons, and I mean, maybe people are a little sick of thinking about it, but can you maybe offer a few words about some of what you found about the impact this has had?
Well, I haven't, well, there's some research that I have done that has looked at how COVID has impacted, for example, parole officers in the prison system. But I haven't done specific research with results yet that looks at how COVID itself has impacted like the operations or that element of the prisons like yet. But what I have done regarding COVID is I chair a working group on corrections and prisons for the Royal Society of Canada. And in that working group with my the group composition, which is an incredible group to work with. It's Dr. Sandra Bracerius, Dr. Ben Crew, Dr. David Pyruz, and Dr. Justin Tetrault. And then also in that we have a representative from CSC, although he has yet to, we're trying to see how he can be active in that group. But in that we wrote a policy brief, and the policy brief was more about things that we had to take into consideration in our prison policies because of COVID-19. So it was the most proactive kind of thing we could do to try to work with the prison space.
And are those so some of those policy changes that you suggested, I'm wondering like how often is it that prisons or people in charge of making the policy, I'm not sure how much is at the provincial or national level, like are you consulted frequently about these sort of things? I noticed on your profile you seem to be involved with a number of different institutions. So are they actively engaging with the sociology community to seriously consider a lot of these proposals?
Well, I know that when we wrote the policy brief, we actually consulted with people and tried to really listen to what was being said and try to incorporate and understand what needed to be done. So I know that I know that it's being read. So I think that's the really important point of dissemination. I think when it came to the implementation of an actual policy, I don't think that I would actually have the wherewithal of how the organization works to understand how it could actually be implemented in person. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're considering the dynamics of the policy, I think there's a place for discussion, but the actual implementation, I wouldn't be a person to consult on that.
Right.
I would not know how to coordinate that.
Right. Yeah. But at least there is that connection. There does seem to be an information exchange, I suppose.
Yeah, but I think I don't think it's the information that I provide is unique in that.
Mm,
I
mm,
really am always really impressed that, a lot of the people that I work with in organizations also are quite aware of the research that's going on.
mm, mm.
They're working in partnership, so it's not, you know what I mean? So that happens as well.
Right, right. And so another topic I think I noticed in some of your work was employment after being incarcerated.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about yeah, some of the research you've done in that area, some of your findings?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things actually, which is kind of more interesting, when I started doing research, how I started doing research in employment reentry, I had recently started doing work at Crossroads Day Reporting Center. And one of the people I was fortunate to meet when I was there was very, very research minded and very rehabilitative in mind. But
Mm,
he was working within the system from his own experience and everything else. And he had this vision of a social enterprise, that what they would do in the social enterprise is you would employ prisoners or former prisoners, people on release,
mm,
and you'd give them a living wage, but you'd also treat them a real skill and give them what they needed in order to get a job in the community, right? So it was, and then the idea is, as a social enterprise, the people running it would also be people on release from prison. So
mm.
it's in every way possible, it's a stepping stone for everybody, right?
Right,
And
right.
part of one of the deliveries was going to be, or was an employment training program. So how we set it up that these people would get these jobs, and how that would be clean coffee, and you could buy the coffee, and then the coffee would the money from it would go back into the into the organization keeping it alive, right? So
Mm,
it's really cool. And I was really fortunate because when they had put in this proposal for it, they included a research component, and I did it as like so I did this component of research for them, and I was able to track these individuals and get to know these guys and girls, these folks, um, over a 3-year period.
mm,
And we would follow up regularly and kind of just, and it was my first time doing a longitudinal study where you get to enjoy building these relationships and really understanding what are the hurdles to employment. So it was like a really good cause of something to be researching, and it was a really interesting way to approach it, right? And one of the things that we found is, incarceration is an impossible barrier, right?
mm.
um, and it's difficult because it's not that it's an impossible barrier that you can't overcome. It's that it's really, really complicated. And there's so many different facets of a person's life that need to be stabilized.
Mm.
And one of the way to stabilize them, the most of them, is if at least you have the employment to have the means to do what's necessary for them. So it's like this massive hurdle, and it's this big barrier, but overcoming it is so complex, and it's just led to a variety of different ways of looking at program and the value of pre-employment programming. And one of the things we recognize is that if we have programming that starts inside, and we recognize this because this is what everybody was asking for, programming in a job that starts inside, that can continue into the community. So some way to like transition into a job, right?
Right,
Or some
right.
course if it needs to be, or something like some kind of stability is something that people really want. And I think that's something that might be doable in some way in the future.
Yeah.
So it's really promising. But employment is necessary to live in many ways. Um, in so many ways, and it's really difficult. And then that's just employment period, and gainful employment where you feel valued in what you're doing is really is it's not something everyone gets to benefit from.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, and in the previous podcast episode, I spoke with Marshall Byers, who participated in the PMP, and talking with him. I mean, even just the pace at say which technology develops alone, and it's not like there's any training to happening in the prisons to keep up with this. So even yeah, if you wanted to get a job at a cafe when you got out, the simple functioning of like lots of places use an iPad now, or one of the credit card chips. And this is not something that requires special training for most of us, because on the outside we're growing with this technology as it comes out, and we just pick up this language as we go. But someone who's been incarcerated for a substantial amount of time, I mean, they're just behind on this very basic this computer literacy that lots of other people seem to have. And I think that's a real hindrance, of course, among many other things as well.
Well, it's interesting because, that period of incarceration in so many ways of our life is not, it wouldn't be a period of that ability to grow, right? So, and it's a huge hindrance, and these are very basic skills, but they're not things that we think of actually teaching, or nor are they necessarily feasible to teach in a very quick term, but they're so necessary and important. No, it's true. Like it's impossible to keep up, and someone who's been inside for quite a long time will really experience the technological shift.
And so this, in the wake of this research study, it sounded like, is there a push to try and get this this implemented? Sorry, what was the name of the person that conducted the study with you?
Which one exactly?
Or sorry, I thought there was a name you had mentioned earlier, someone who was.
No, I wasn't sure if you were referring to the COVID study or to the employment study.
Oh, sorry, the employment study.
Well, the employment study was a social enterprise. So it was that wasn't the person who put in that social enterprise, the employee of whatever, Don Evans.
Don Evans. Okay.
Yeah, so he was fabulous. He put that forward, and it was actually awarded funding. It was a proposal that was funded, right? So they were able to try, and like Clink was a thing, like Clink coffee was a thing for a period of time, years.
And but so it's not a thing now after the study this disbanded?
No, it had nothing to do with the study. The study was for the first 3-year period, right?
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
So this is still
yeah, so we're talking like within a decade or so. Social enterprises are really, really difficult to sustain. It's a difficult model.
Right. So I mean, what are some of the main challenges that make it so difficult to sustain in the long term?
Like, as a social enterprise, okay, so I'm not a business person, but how I was led to understand it is just you have a grant for startup, but you have to have enough money to support the size of the social enterprise, right?
Right.
To keep everybody going, and it's not a easy thing to do.
Right. So I guess pivoting a little bit to just some of your other research. So you've also looked at some aspects of the prison system through the lens of gender. You've looked at some gender specific experiences, including the experiences of transgender persons involved in the prison system. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the work you've done in that direction?
So the work I've done there has been more on the employer, on the correctional officer perspective, on the other side. It was just something that I was able to shed light on because it's a complex issue, and it's not that it's complex, like it's not an argument about what the policy should be. Like it's not if it's not about that, it's about how it can be implemented causes challenges, and it's challenges for everyone. Like there's discussions to be had about what the person the prisoner feels is comfortable in certain situations versus what the staff feel is comfortable. And you can't just have a policy about what is and isn't comfortable for people when
Right.
it's outside, right? Like, so there's actual complications in implementation that need discussion. So one of the things that I was looking at is just how that impacts a person, right?
Mm.
And in that context, I was looking at, what are the feelings and the understandings around it? What can be done in training to raise awareness?
Mm.
Like, one of the things that I think is really important is transgender prisoner placement is a really important issue. So it's really important that there's training on that, right?
Mm.
And I was pleased to learn that there is some training, but there's a lot more training that can go into it. And I learned from that work from the recruits, actually. What was really clear is that they wanted more simple training about what was the right thing to do, because for some people, they really didn't know. And
Mm.
they wanted something as simple as, like, how do you know a person's pronouns, right?
Mm.
And it's like, it's not something that everyone's aware of. And it's, what, like, how do you ask? Like, how, like, they also wanted that kind of information. So
Mm.
it was like, if people were really worried about being misinterpreted because of things they just didn't know,
Right.
right? So it was so that that in itself speaks to that this is a space that requires um a lot more knowledge, right?
Mm.
And just a little bit of flexibility, and like, people want training and people want to know what to do and what's the best thing to do, and people want to know how to best deal with it, but people want to be respected in doing that.
Mm.
And it just shed light that it's that implementation in a way that's going to be that's really going to be successful is going to just need to figure out what is the right way to move
Mm.
forward, and how do we best meet everybody's needs.
It's I mean, it's reassuring to hear that the desire for the training is there, because you need both those things, right? Like the training needs to be in place, but if you have if there isn't a desire for it, it's not going to be absorbed, most likely. So it's good to know that there's a willingness to move forward and to uh, develop this. Yeah. So to maybe put a little more personal slant on things, how did you? What is your journey to studying the things that you're studying? How did you come to work in sociology and get interested in some of these specific topics? Are you? Oh, sorry. I think I lost you there for a second.
Yeah, it froze up.
Oh, okay, okay. But yeah, seems you're back now. Yeah. So
Yeah.
how like when you first started university, were you already interested in sociology? Were you already interested in the sociology of the prison system? How did you find yourself where you are today?
Got it. So okay, let's see. So no, my PhD was masculinities. So
Mm.
it was all masculinities and that sort of thing. And one of the things that happened that kind of moved over, and I was always interested in what now we call it crim, at the time was like sociology of deviance, right?
Mm.
But I was introduced to an individual who'd been wrongly convicted, and I had learned a bit about just that prison experience and its impact, and started doing a little bit of work with a colleague of mine in the area of wrongful conviction. And then just the natural sort of merging of that work with the masculinities body stuff I was doing
Mm.
was to look at body and masculinities within the prison space. So that was the study I set out to do when I started doing work with persons who had just recently been released from prison.
Mm.
um, and then I just kind of followed that trajectory. So that's sort of that research path went. But it was an interest in it's interesting because, or to me it is, that the study I set out to do was just understandings of masculinities and the body. The second part being the body in prisons. I've never done that second half. Like I did the masculinities, but I never finished the project.
Any does it rattle around in the back of your head sometimes? Or you ever think, oh, maybe I should go back and finish that other part? Or you happily on a different path now?
Oh no, I still need to finish that. I'm a completionist, so yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's like I have to check that. Not that I have to check it off, but I'm like, there's stuff there that needs to be written about.
Right.
And I think it, and there's some of the things about it, like in that whole area, just the value of having a gym in the prisons. Like, not every facility has a gym for everyone, right? So just that value of having that, or that sort of, it's a strong case. So yeah, I definitely intend to do that. And I probably have to collect the data anew at this point. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of topics, a lot of interesting topics out there to cover.
Yeah.
You can't do them all at the exact same time, unfortunately. So speaking of the zoo of interesting topics, I think I saw something you did on police militarization as well. Am I remembering that correctly?
I wouldn't say police militarization. I've written on SWAT, or emergency response teams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what's some of the things you did surrounding those topics?
Actually, I'm doing a study right now with the same person, and it's a really interesting way of working together because he has experience in emergency response teams. So, and then I look at it in such a different way, and then we find a space where we agree, and that's what we write, right? So it's a really interesting, great, it's a fabulous collaboration. And we were looking at, right now we're putting together two different papers from these data sets, but one is looking at the barriers that exist in recruiting women to these types of positions. And one is we're looking at how variable these types of things are across the country, and trying to understand the implications of that. Because if we're, if stuff's happening and we don't understand where it's going wrong, right? So I think it's really, really interesting.
So is the variation provincial? Is it clustered around provinces, or is it just from city to city? Is there quite a bit of variation even within a given province, say?
There's just, it's not even like that. What even constitutes having an emergency response team? That's the level of the variation, who has one and who doesn't.
Right.
You know what I mean?
So I would expect that it's clustered around the larger cities, whatever one is taking that term to mean exactly. Is that what you're finding? Is that it's most of the major cities?
Yeah, well, and the cities definitely will have them, and we find that, but then it's at what point is something too small to be a city with its own? There's a lot of variability, right? So when we're talking about emergency response team and even things like militarization, well, what exactly are we even talking about? Are we talking about anything that identifies under emergency response, or are we looking at specific models of it, or what is the landscape? You know what I mean? What's kind of, yeah, that's more my level is kind of what is actually happening.
I see.
And then what's going on within that, because we don't know, it's so variable. So
I suppose then what is it that you see that's happening with a lot of places?
Well, we're just starting the analysis, and we're just
Hmm.
starting looking at
Oh, this
composition.
is
So,
right,
yeah,
right. This
this is
is,
really, really new.
oh, I
So
see.
that's kind of what we're doing right now.
Hmm.
So, is the previous paper was, again, that was just like, you know, what's happening in terms of how resources are allocated. It was all that kind of thing. It's
Hmm.
just a different way of informing the discussion, right?
Right, right, right. Yeah, I know. I know right now so I'm currently located in Calgary, but
Yeah.
I grew up in Winnipeg. I just recently left Winnipeg, and a couple of years ago, we got a police helicopter in Winnipeg, and I know that there's a bit of community organizing now, a bit of a pushback against this police helicopter. Both, I mean, I mean, a number of reasons. People are it's creating a noise disturbance in a number of neighborhoods during the evening, and then there's a lot of questions about the cost benefit analysis. I mean, it's quite expensive to have a helicopter running over a city all night, and then what's the actual outcome. What yeah, what's the benefit coming out of that, and is it really worth the costs?
Yeah. Well, and in that context, like I definitely see that's a really complicated issue, right? And there's a degree of surveillance imposed by a helicopter that's going to be a very complicated issue.
Hmm.
So it's a complex issue, and yeah, like, but I guess it's what you're researching within that. Like, I don't. What is the purpose of the helicopter?
Hmm.
Like, honestly, like, what is like, is it for search and rescue? Is it like, what is the?
I think it's just yeah, generally to I mean, assist like the police officers in catching criminals, is just like giving air support, if you will. I believe there was one case where it was used for search and rescue, like early on in its employment, just because it happened to be more readily available than the nearest emergency helicopter. But outside of that, that's yeah. As I understand, that's not really its primary function, nor has it really been used for that much at all. I mean, most nights is just generally patrolling as a police officer would in their car. It just drives circles around the downtown area, I guess, waiting until there's some sort of call.
Yeah, no, that I'm glad that's not a discussion that I have to have,
Mm,
not being in Winnipeg, because I don't know how I would feel about it.
mm, mm.
No, because that's, you're right. It's really, and I guess the one thing is knowing what its function is, right?
Mm.
And what it's used for, and being able to learn that, and then allowing people to make a decision about.
Mm.
Because it's always interesting, because when I think about something like a helicopter, I'm
Mm.
always thinking about it in like that scenario, like that the scenario where I'd be really happy that it existed, like if my kid went missing, right?
Mm. Mm.
So like I always think about it in that scenario. So I don't know if I would not want the helicopter, but you know what I
Right.
mean? It would be complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. Although I think, I mean, that sounds like having that tool available for when people go missing. That sounds like a very different resource, and that sounds like a resource that's not patrolling the night sky, um, waiting for that call. That sounds like something that could, say, be fired up in the instance of such an emergency, someone going missing, or some sort of emergency evacuation, something of that nature.
Yeah, no, but I guess again, it would really, yeah, it would be really getting informed about what exactly it's
Mm,
doing.
mm, yeah, yeah.
it's always interesting because when you hear about something, like, because I wasn't aware of this whole helicopter issue, right?
Mm,
How you hear about it, and it's like there's so many things about it that you just don't know.
mm.
And then I always find I never want to put an opinion out on something before I actually know something,
Right, right.
because yeah, there's just a lot of questions to be asked first. And it's and these kind of things are really complicated, especially right now, because there's so many pressures in so many different ways around, and different ways to manage the different issues,
Mm,
that it's interesting. That's one I'm probably going to have to read up on.
mm, mm. Well, yeah, I hope, I mean, it sounds like it could be uh, relevant to the current research that you're doing, although I don't know the scope. So is this across Canada you're looking at various
Yeah,
cities across the country?
our data was across the country
Mm, mm,
of people who chose to participate,
mm.
but it's really it's not engaged with that discussion.
Right. Okay.
It's looking at more of a, it's looking at the realities, like why are there so few women in
Mm,
the ERT?
mm.
What's going on? Is like what is happening? Are there barriers? Is it right? And it's a complicated issue. It needs to be researched in multiple ways. It
Mm.
also needs to talk to women in the RCMP and see if they're even interested, or not RCMP per se, but women in a police service, and if they're even interested in being on the ERT teams.
Right.
So
Right.
it's kind of looking at what's happening, where the gender imbalance is coming from.
Right.
And I think that's an important dialogue as well, because a lot of these discussions are going to go back to masculinities,
Mm,
and this notion of these hypermasculine environments.
mm.
And then it's a whole discussion of what that means and how things are interpreted. And then we're gonna, so it's gonna be, because that idea of militarization is a very hypermasculine conceptualization, right?
Mm, mm.
So it's sort of, and I think one of the things about that is seeing people, like everybody, equally represented in groups like the ERTs and stuff like that. So we can't do that unless we figure out what the barriers are.
Right. Right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing some of those findings when this study becomes a publication.
Yeah, it'll take a bit.
So bringing things, I guess back around, in terms of you know perhaps prison education and gainful employment. Um, I know we already touched on this a little bit, but perhaps do you have any sort of large scale or even small scale insights as to what can be done, what should be done to just help improve prison education and employment afterwards, and specifically like maybe tangible things that can be pushed towards and should be pushed towards now.
But there are so many things that can be done.
Hmm.
It all, but it requires a different outlook, right? Because it needs resources.
Hmm.
So you could start with programming in the prisons. You could start with access to post-secondary education. You could start with more skills and actually learn skills,
Hmm.
and a variety of different types of courses to start inside. You can do, as I mentioned, employment training that ends up in an occupation, like in an actual job upon release.
Hmm.
There's so many things that could be done that would be incredible, right? But I think more important than that, we have to think about substance once a person arrives,
Hmm.
and also recognize that you might not be ready to walk out that door and right into a job.
Hmm.
So we need to find a way to give people the support they need to actually get back on their feet.
Right.
And that means that society has to be willing to invest, and that people get to be on parole and actually have a living wage, or a wage, right?
Right.
Like the idea would be, and it's a whole new different degree of challenges.
Mm.
And that's why employment programming is so important. So there's bigger things that could be looked at, but it all requires resources.
Right. And I guess, in order for this to be effective too, it has to happen in conjunction with the prison system, right? Like these sort of formal programs probably need to be working hand in hand with prison facilities to get involved and set up some of these programs or pipelines to gainful employment. I'm assuming. And I mean, for example, right now, so I think the PNP, we've been doing some wonderful work. I mean, from some of the other things we've released, you can see that there's a lot of positive impact, but we're sort of, in some sense, working quite outside the system right now. And yeah, perhaps some sort of creating more programs within the system to help result in gainful employment afterwards. Like I know, looking at some of the letters when I chose my pen pal, there was a number of people who were looking specifically at applied mathematics because they had certain plans, certain career plans for when they got out, and they wanted the practical mathematical skills that they could apply to a job afterwards.
Yeah, it's it's exactly what people want. It's almost like once you've already picked your subject, you know what I mean? It for the people who thrive in or appreciate math or want the skills, it's really important. And it's no different than when we talk about increasing access to post-secondary education, right? But yeah, you guys are do you want to talk a bit more about what you guys are doing?
Yeah, so I suppose this is the Prison Math Podcast. So maybe there are some listeners that don't know everything about what we've been doing, but essentially we find people who are incarcerated and are interested in expanding their mathematical knowledge. And there's a wide range of people. Some people, as I mentioned, they're looking for applied math because they have a specific job in mind. Some people have just discovered the joy of mathematics. Founder Christopher Havens, his goal was to publish research mathematics, theoretical mathematics. So there's a wide scale of people always looking for mentors. And yeah, so we find these people and we hook them up with mentors. So for example, I've been a pen pal with someone since February. We've had a series of letters going back and forth, just discussing mathematics. I'll give him some problems or just general exposition. And my most recent letter, I attached a paper on the history of a certain topic. And that's how we've been engaging. Although, of course, people will discuss all sorts of things in their letters with each other. And yeah, this program seems to have had a pretty big impact on a number of people's lives. It's really, I mentioned Marshall Byers before, who was our guest on the first podcast. It seems like being involved in the Prison Math Project was inspirational in a sense, and helped give him some of the tools to do, what he's doing now. I mean, not just mathematical literacy, sure, that's important, but just being able to engage with other people deeply on a topic, having someone reach out and talking with someone. I think this is very, very valuable on a number of different levels. And right now, we've only been only been focused on people who are incarcerated in the United States, just because that's where this program began. But ideally, we would like to expand out, and I mean, perhaps after this interview, I should talk to you about this, because maybe you have some idea. I've been thinking about trying to reach out and contact some institutions in Canada and figure out, how do we get advertising about this program to people incarcerated in Canada? How do we start facilitating this? Of course, right now we need the mentors in order to support this. So if anyone's watching this and you're interested, we need people at all skill levels of mathematics, from high school, junior high level mathematics up to university level mathematics. So if you're interested at all, please check out the links in the description to the Prison Math Project. And we need funding too. It takes financial resources to make this thing happen. So please consider donating as well if you're interested in this program. But yeah, so that's my synopsis of the PMP, where we're at and what we've been trying to do.
It's pretty awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, yeah, seems like a great program. I mean, I've just been having a lot of fun, even just on like a selfish, in a sense, personal level. I just enjoy talking about mathematics. So great. Now I have a pen pal who wants to read me blabbing on about math for pages and pages. So it's it's been fantastic on my end as well. But yeah, there's a lot of people too volunteering their time for this program. Of course, the mentors themselves. We have quite a few now. We've been growing, but there's people doing stuff behind the scenes. Like there's a website that needs to get managed, and someone needs to take in these applicants, and someone needs to set up the letters. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff too that makes this organization run. So yeah.
It's it's a lot.
But
the thing is, you're doing really good work, and it's almost too, it's like, what is the end goal, right?
I mean, I think I guess I'm not I suppose there's a number of end goals. Just I guess it could be summed up as just improving people's lives.
Yeah, no, I know, it's awesome, right?
Yeah.
But it's one of those two, like, I think right now it's a great program and it'll grow, but there's so much you can do with that, right?
Right. In terms of,
who knows where it's going to take you to, right?
Yeah. Well, as you were mentioning, helping set up programs so people could be gainfully employed. Perhaps that's a thing we could start thinking about as we gain the resources to do that. If we could have a specific applied math and maybe find ways to reach out to industry, where people develop applied math skills, or I mean, even just the ability to tutor mathematics. I mean, if you learn mathematics, you can tutor mathematics, and you can certainly make a living wage going from there. So I think maybe that could be another next step that we look towards, is building those connections outside. Like, okay, we've got this educational connection. What other opportunities can we make available through this?
Yeah, no, there's so many ways. Like, so I'm just curious how you guys see it moving forward and what you want to see.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of people involved, so I don't feel too confident at this exact time saying like, this is the mission statement of the prison math project. But I think, we have a common goal of wanting to reach more people and just improve mathematics and mathematics literacy. There's also, we're trying to build a sense of community through the prison math project as well. I'm hoping to get a Zoom meeting going later this week with a number of the mentors, and just, we have a little forum too that a number of us discuss on, because I think this is an important part of it too, is building a sense of community amongst everyone involved. And I think that's also translates into opportunities, as people like Marshall end up leaving the prison system as people get released, and now there's a community, a global community that could help these people. So
yeah, no, it's incredible. Like it's really neat. And there's so many ways to actualize it and things to do. Like it's pretty awesome, and it's recognized. And I also think it's in a really important area, because it's in this subject that so many people are scared of, right? So it allows people who, and I think because other people are scared of, sometimes it makes one feel that they should be scared of it, even though there's no reason to. So I just think it, and it's such a like it's such a valued subject, right? And it's such an important skill. Sorry, I'm an academic. I always think in terms of subjects, and
right.
But it's a really important skill set. So, and there's so many ways that it can be put out there. I just think it's a really important area. It's an important gap that you guys are noticing.
Well, and I hope too that we can somehow change that perception of it being scary. Like you said, perhaps people see this and maybe it helps them realize like, oh, maybe they shouldn't be scared of math. I'm about to say a quote that I feel like I've regurgitated 20 times over this last week, but it's this quote by Edward Frankel. He's a mathematician, and in one of his pop math books, he compares math education to, imagine that all you ever learned about painting was how to paint fences, and you only learned how to do it in one color. So you just paint fences red. That's all you know of painting. You have no idea that you can go and paint a house, let alone go look at works of like Da Vinci or Jackson Pollock, and that people do this for fun and aesthetic value. And I think it's an apt analogy to how mathematics is taught. We often, so it is very useful. And I think we shouldn't undermine the usefulness of it. We should work harder to give people those practical connections. But I also think that we don't focus enough on some of the aesthetic value of mathematics. There's lots of these cool, trippy, psychedelic looking pictures, things like this Mandelbrot set, or there's these certain colored graphs of what are called complex functions. And they're just very interesting patterns. They're artistic, they're beautiful. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice by sweeping the artistry of mathematics under the rug. And so hopefully some of that can come through across in the PMP as well, not just to the mentees that we have involved, but to the greater community. Some people might be like, oh, people are doing math in prison for fun. Yeah, there's cool things happening, like thinking about a 4D cube, like that's kind of wild,
Well, when I talk about sort of this whole topic, I always think of it how math can actually be the hook to desistance, right? Like for some people, and we've seen it, like we're watching it happen. Math is one of those hooks, not the only one, but math is a hook. It's something that's a skill being developed that's going to help into the community, and it's identity, and it's a community, and it'll be gainful employment. But it'll be, remember I said most of us don't get to that benefit of liking what we do, right? Like it's pretty cool. So
yeah,
no, I think it's a great initiative, and I think it's that, like, math as the hook. right? And that's one of the most important things for the desistance process, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, a number of people have talked about, finding mathematics in prison, and that's perhaps even certainly the term hooked came up because they're, all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, it's you find a thing, you find some sort of hobby, some sort of goal, some sort of pursuit, and especially if that translates into something useful in a broader context. And it would be great. I mean, one of the nice things about math is that calculators and textbooks are important, but the basic tool is just a pen and a piece of paper. It would be great if there was like a prison chemistry project, or a prison biology project that could help get people involved in STEM. But so it's a little bit harder to set up a chemistry lab in a prison, or like have frog dissections or something going on. So I think in some sense, the prison math project has certain unique characteristics that make this a pretty viable option for this mentorship program.
Yeah. No, yeah, no, it's great, and there's so many ways to grow, right?
Yeah, I'll certainly. You've certainly got me thinking about what avenues the PMP might be able to go down in the future as we grow.
Yeah, it's just one thing at a time, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think yeah, it's something that's yeah, it's just something that's really I'm looking forward to looking at how it stays.
So I think we're coming up on time here.
Yeah.
So I just want to give you an opportunity, if there's, so for any of our listeners, if you think there's any sort of research going on that you'd like to recommend, or anything that you're involved in that you think people should be aware of, or just any sort of general parting words you want to leave us with.
I don't know. I think there's a lot of people doing a lot of really good research right now, so that'd be hard to start listing it all off. I think it's interesting. As I learn about the project, I do research on both prisoners and releasees and parole officers, which is relatively new, and correctional workers, and kind of all sides of it. It's really interesting to me because I think everyone has the same end goals. It doesn't matter. Everyone wants to make the lives better, right? But it's really interesting to me how so many different factors are at play that are always making it hard, right? And I always think that if we can make, in the day-to-day interactions that happen, if we can make it better for everybody, if we can make it better for staff, it's going to be better for prisoners too. And if we can make it better for prisoners, it's going to be better for staff. And they're living in that same world. So we need to think about always both sides, and just find it, because that's how we're actually going to impact the change, right? Like, so it's just it's interesting in that space, in that context. And I just, the reason I just wanted to share that, I was just thinking about just how it tends to, it tends sometimes to be hard in both spaces. But I think it's really important to try to understand why things are the way they are in both spaces, and how things are getting interpreted in both spaces.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think the best intentioned, it doesn't work, right?
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, right? If you have people on either side of it, if they're miserable, if they're not in, I mean, okay, it's hard to say enjoying it if you're incarcerated, but like it makes sense that the prison staff, if they're not happy with their work environment, that's going to translate into every aspect of their lives, their treatment of the prisoners and each other, and even outside of work as well. So yeah, it makes sense that we want something where everyone is as comfortable as they can be in the situation, and yeah, it makes perfect sense to me that that has a certain reciprocity between the two sides.
Well, just when I think about it, I just think everybody wants prisoners doing math. Like everyone is going to be like, as people learn about it, everyone's going to be really excited about the idea. It's literally one that everyone's going to agree on, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it's really cool because it's going to really, it's interesting because when you see a person like as a staff, it's cool to see someone thrive. And if people can thrive by doing math or develop and grow, that's going to be awesome for everybody, the person who's thriving and growing and developing the skills, and everyone who's positively impacted by that, right? So I think it's something that everybody wants to see.
Well, good. So we just need to get more of the word out there then. Help come help our prisoners do some more math. Okay, well, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and well, thanks on behalf of the entire PMP.
Thanks for having me.